Now we reached the, the last part of this very exciting conference, exciting 2 days. I feel the last part is really, we call the round table. In my mind is round, here is a half circle, and the other half is there. So everybody, like all speakers, are part of the round table. But because there are moderators that didn't have a chance to talk, so we will let them talk first, and then the floor is totally open. I'm thinking, because there have been so many great ideas, wonderful information, and discussions, so maybe now is the time to maybe some larger issues, some kind of broader even questions, especially in more future-oriented. We have mentioned many studies, ongoing one, past one, but what's happened to the future? If this conference can produce something, I feel that last part will be a great time to think ahead and talk about possibilities, even for future collaboration, connecting, networking, and sustain this effort and bring it to the future. That would be great. Before actually inviting the panelists to speak, I just want to say a little bit about my impression. I feel there are a lot of stuff I want to talk about, but one thing I just want to say that the beginning of this conference, I gave like a 2 minutes remark. One thing I said is that we organized this conference because we sense the emergence of a field and around this digital technology, but transcending the existing fields. But now I just feel even stronger, that feeling. I feel we do have a shared language, although we belong to different fields, our history, anthropology, curating. I feel very strongly there's a real connection. We really can learn. I can learn from everybody, can really, there's so much to learn. I feel somehow, in the old discipline, my discipline is art history, we often feel very hard to communicate cross region and time. So you're a pre-modern, I'm contemporary, you're Asia, I'm Europe. There's always this gap, even though we share this discipline. But the virtue of this discussion, I feel, this somehow time and this space, this old gap somehow becomes secondary. I feel very easily to talk like studying ancient bronze and studying anime, somehow just very easy to communicate with each other. I feel that's quite exciting for me. I feel that also approve. I also feel technology is one thing we all are dealing with it, we all experimenting with it. But then there's dimensions. I find if we have it's a large field. I begin to sense, because each project has a specific purpose and also shows the dimension of this field. For example, there's about preservation, that's a very important dimension. Reconstruction, restoration, that's a very important dimension. Research, conducting research, another dimension, including all these amazing database. And the exhibition is a huge dimension, dealing with the audience, its embodied experience. And then this institution, I feel this morning we begin to deal with actually the new institution like this digital forum or something begin to emerge to really normalize this kind of practice. I feel this all very, very exciting for me. So my hope is really from this kind of meeting, we'll have more, definitely. There we can have some kind of stable or sustained connections. That's my hope. I don't know the form, how can we keep this kind of exchange? I feel I just learned so much, but this is one conference. Then how can we continue this exchange, keep the contact? How can we form that? I feel maybe people have suggestions. So here just my few things. Now I'd like to maybe invite panelists, maybe starting from that side and this way. Okay, please. Adam, please go ahead.
So you're inviting us to discuss our reactions to the...
Well, anything. Actually, it's anything. Actually, anything you want to say is fine.
Well, I've had many thoughts over the course of the conference. Some of them are expanding on some of the things that we talked about while I was moderating, and others are sort of thoughts that I've kept to myself so far. I mean, I think one of the other, so I'm not a specialist in either the technological side or actually the in-gallery use of that technology. So I'm something of an outsider. But there are two very simple things that I think have come back to me repeatedly. One is an expansion, I think, of actually Professor Wang's observation earlier, the distinction between the creation of things that are completely new, inspired by antiquity, right? And the discussion during the session that I was moderating made the distinction between completely new works of art, rather like the one that you were talking about in your presentation, and the pedagogical role of technology, where you're not creating anything new, but you're trying to kind of bring knowledge that you have into the minds of your museum-going audience. For me, it was a three-way split, actually. That there was the research side, there was the pedagogical side, and there was the creation side. And certainly when I first became aware of the Xiangtangshan project, I thought of it essentially as a research exercise. This was a way of answering research questions in ways that you wouldn't be able to without the kinds of digital tools that you were using, knowing answers to questions that most museum goers probably don't have foremost in their minds unless you've led them through a very careful process in a gallery. Questions like, from which cave did this particular head come, for example, right? There's very fundamental questions about the fate of the objects from this Xiangtangshan cave. So when I first knew about your project, I was thinking of it primarily in terms of the research questions that it would answer. So yeah, I made a three-way division, right, between doing research better using these tools, conveying the results of that research better in a more vivid way to an audience in ways that static objects and minimal labels in a legacy gallery format would be unable to do. And then thirdly, creating completely new works of art. But I would add that, of course, you're always doing all three at the same time, right? They're all, one question I actually wanted to ask Professor Wang was about while you were giving your presentation, was about the source of the choreography, of the historical grounding of the choreography that you applied to your animated dancers. So that was presumably one point where, although you're creating something entirely new, you're nevertheless touching upon historical realities too, right? But you partially answered that in one of the audience questions you had there. The other observation I was going to make, and one of my other hopes for having the presence of some of this technology in a gallery context, is to try to sort of give a lay museum visitor something more of the experience that an undergraduate or a graduate student has when they spend 3 hours in a seminar class, or better still, a whole semester with faculty working with them in a very painstaking way on the objects that you once encountered in a collection, where you have freedom to give them resources of a kind that most museum visitors simply don't have. They don't have the leisure, right, or the access to read scientific publications. They don't have, I'm talking about most museum visitors, they don't have access to anything like the amount of imagery that a student can experience over the course through both lectures and through their own work, right? During a course, when they say studying the 6th century, studying North China's 6th century Buddhism. By the end of a course, a student has been exposed to a huge wealth of material that's accessible to them because they're in a class in a museum context. And only a tiny fraction of that is accessible to someone who's present in a legacy museum gallery. But I think one thing that technology can do is to kind of bridge that experience a little bit, because I think that's what we all actually hope to convey in a museum context. It's some of that knowledge that we've spent our time acquiring and sharing in a very sort of dedicated way with undergraduate and graduate students. And of course, as they become graduate students, they begin to generate that knowledge themselves through their dissertations and their first publications. But to be able to share a little bit more of that intense richness that we know is out there with a museum-going audience, I think is something else that occurred to me frequently while listening to all of your presentations. And I'll just leave it there. 2 observations. So yeah, the threefold division and somehow bridging a little bit more of the huge intellectual richness that lies behind objects that we do share in an academic context, but that we need more resources to share more of that with our general public, I feel.
Yeah.
Yes, why not? Why not? Why is
Yes.
So very quickly, in fact, what I showed was really the tip of the iceberg. In fact, there was a lot of research, academic research, historic research that goes into our project. And I just didn't show the behind-the-scene work. So 2 big research. One is that there's a massive amount of research that goes into the reading of Dunhuang manuscripts and trying to get out the music notation, the dance notation. In fact, we decoded the dance notation based on Dunhuang manuscript. And that's really like the most rigorous kind of scholarship, except when you translate it into the artistic show, it's really excessive distillation of what we do. But this is still, there's a gap between what research can yield and what can get into the show that can let the general audience access it. So that's a gap that we're still trying to show. So that's one thing. Another thing is that we actually based on one particular Dunhuang cave, and there's a huge amount of research try to figure out what is the whole overall program about. And then once we figure out that deep structure, the program, then the whole choreography actually try to map out that program. So that's the second part. So it's essentially, there's quite a rigorous scholarly research behind this, and only it's kind of meagerly distilled into what we show. Yeah, that's the story.
Oh my goodness, I am filled with so many thoughts and questions from the past day and a half of talks. And let me start by following on from the comments that you have just made. I'm left thinking, because I work in a museum, I'm left thinking of so moving on from your 3-way division of technology, either as a new experience in and of itself, or an experience that can allow the visitor to approach an object, especially a very foreign, unknown object, and to be guided or encouraged in the kind of close looking and observation and appreciation that we hope our visitors will apply to every object that we have in every case. Enhance and encourage and impart that sense of curiosity and allow the visitor to relax into a state of focused observation. And so that would be one of the best uses of technology in a museum setting that would enhance the exhibition experience. And the cautionary tale that I can see from just museums' efforts to do this as technology has developed over the decades is how to understand the difference between creating the tool that will allow the visitor to do that and how to understand when you've actually created something that's a bit of a distraction, where the technology is in the way of looking closely at an object and appreciating the thing itself, so to speak. So that's one observation that I'm left thinking of. Also, in museums, the way that we create exhibition spaces and the way that we try and encourage that kind of observation, close looking, learning, experiencing something that you have never seen before, changes over time. And so I'm also left thinking about considering how rapidly technology changes now, how can museums think about and begin to keep up with the certainty that as we develop new technologies, they will also seem stale and out of date even more quickly than they do now. If you go to any museum, you will if you're looking closely, you will immediately figure out which of the exhibitions have been recently renovated and which ones have really not been touched for a very long time. And there's a charm to those as well, for those museum geeks who love the old time look and feel. And then the other thing that has been so stimulating to think about is with new technologies, and I'm thinking of things like virtual reality. If a museum is a collective space that invites everyone and in which you are not having the same experience that you might have in your own living room, how does a technology that tends to be, at least at the moment, pretty individual, like a VR headset, you're somewhat isolated when you're in that headset. How can we create experiences that are mind-blowing for you, the individual, but also maintain that collective experience of being in a museum setting, and also keep visitors from stumbling over each other and walking into a stairwell? And so, how do we engineer spaces that you can opt into? And then, from a visitor satisfaction standpoint, because we are all ages at museums, how do we also encourage people to opt in who might not be comfortable, for example, with newer technologies? So how do we pull in our older audiences, or maybe our less wealthy audiences who aren't the immediate adopters of new technologies? And so lots to think about, many questions for the community, but those are some of the things I'm taking away.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right, so I'm just going to make a quick comment, and then I'm going to take us in a completely other direction for a moment. I just wanted to respond very quickly that at least at the Met, our audience is very aware of the question of where did your art come from. And I think the Shangtangshan exhibition is a really great, complete answer to that, with sort of warts and all kind of, this is the cave, and this is what it would look like if it were in the cave. It's not in the cave. Here's how it wound up in New York. So I think there is a real interest there and a real need on our end to answer that question as fully and clearly as we can. And then I'm not a curator, I'm a collections manager, so I'm going to go off in that direction and take us away from the public and kind of into the database and collection care world for a moment. Something I've been thinking a lot about over the past, over today is sort of how 3D technology is starting to sort of pop up everywhere. So it pops up in the area of the work that I do with the Met's imaging department. And then on Thursday morning, I was working with a team to move a 500-pound sculpture for crating. And someone came down and made a 3D scan of it in 10 minutes. And that's going to be sent to a company that is going to mill out a custom crate base for it. And that's wild. That's fabulous. I'm so excited. But now we have a model of this object that really only the people that do the packing know about. So what are we going to do with it next? What should we do with it next? Where does it go? And I think that's that's a question in general. Like, as people start applying this technology in multiple arenas, how can we repurpose what we have? And then I also think, to that same point, and to yours about the rapid pace of technology, I think there's also a very real concern, going back to the idea of archival standards. I think we as a field need to start really thinking about them. We have them for images, for 2D images. We should have them for 3D images, so that, 10 years from now, I'm like, oh, we made a scan of that yaksha so we could create it, and then I can't open it. And then it's no good to anyone. So I think that's a very real challenge, because we've just been kind of creating a lot of these, and how can we kind of bring everything back together as a field and be able to trade information back and forth. So thank you, everyone. This has been a really amazing experience.
Thank you. Cassie? Or maybe Jason first. You're the guest.
All right. I think for me, I just feel very lucky to be here. This is a great learning opportunity for me to learn many things. And originally I was thinking about the project of this restoration of the Xiangtangshan, or the restoration of the Lumen Caves. For me, it was more like academic exercise. What the original would look like, how they would appear when they were in the cave. But I think after today's discussion, especially these three presentations given by the scholars from China today, it showed me many other things, the new possibilities. For me, we work at the museum, what we do is we tell a story about what we have in the collection. And I think this new technology, especially the 3D modeling, that certainly would help us to tell the story better. And on the other hand, it's not just a simple restoration of the works. It also gives the other dimension. One of the things I think the Professor Chen Qiang was doing about this Gaussian process, try to give us it really shows us how you use it, almost like the facial recognition program, but at the same time, it gives you all the possibility. At the same time, it gives you almost like an evolutionary line of different styles. One of the basic tools as the art historian, what we do is to go by the styles. We do the stylistic analysis, but I think that certainly would give us so much help by giving us all these possibilities, or these different models from different period of time. But I was speaking with Professor Wu Hong later at lunch, and the other thing that I think that we should pay attention to is that it doesn't matter how the scientific or technological methodology they're using. There's always a human dimension there. There's always Professor Jia or Professor Zhang behind this process. So it's not only, they are trying to restore or to reconstruct this image, but there's always this input by them as a person. So that's something I think that we should not ignore. We should not take everything just as a result of scientific research. Yes, it is scientific research, but it's always done by a human being. So this is one of the things I think that we should keep remind ourselves from time to time. And the one other thing I feel about this, I just feel they really give us so many new possibilities and so many new ways to make ourselves or to make our work relevant to the general public. A museum is a place for public education. So for me, the most important thing is to bring people into the museum, especially the young people. And I see from Abby's work and also from the presentation today, it certainly gives us a lot new ways of thinking to get people engaged in the museum work. Thank you.
Thank you. Cassie, do you want to?
These presentations have been wonderful to show how people are working with imaging and cultural sites. Okay. These presentations have been especially wonderful for me to see how people are working with cultural sites and creating a narrative that connects the imaging that they're doing and and the understanding of these sites by the people who are looking at them. The Greek material, the Roman material. I think those are, when we create our websites, we're of course building on our research and our gathering of the images of pieces all over the world. But one of the most difficult things is to create some kind of a story or a narrative or a historical context in which people can appreciate these things and be drawn in to the websites. I think it doesn't have to be a whole semester course, but just to make a connection with people, then they will want to learn more. And I think it's wonderful to see and hear how others of you have been doing that. I'll let Wei Zheng carry on.
Yes.
All right. Well, so it's great. Thank you so much for all the speakers, and this is really out of my imagination before we started. Because when I came into the conference, though we planned this conference for several months, but I never could predict what will happen. What kind of stuff people is gonna say. But this is so stimulating for a very kind of selfish purpose. We held this conference so we can learn from you, so we can turn around and make something appropriate, something for ourselves, in the future. So that's kind of the kind of more selfish kind of purpose. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it just kind of tells us, at least for me, how much we have been doing, individually. And would that be so great, if we can all work together, or we can create something a network that we can share this kind of information technology, in a more immediate kind of fashion. So I think that's gonna really help this field grow together. And I'm thinking about the theme of this conference is about heritage. People use this term digital heritage, right? So I really feel there's a great hope about this concept and how the future of this concept. We will be able to share the meaning and significance of the heritage site, much faster, make it much more available for many people. We can really be more creative as well, right? It's not just about knowledge, but also about creativity. Thinking about Eugene's and also the Chem Lab and also Abby's exhibition. So I think there's a lot of great things about this. But of course, on the other hand, this also kind of tells us we are entering a very different kind of world, I would say. I remember Professor and I, a long time ago when we started this project, we were talking about 100 years ago or so when photography just started. The entire field of art history really changed. And what about now, right? So how this field is going to change, again, it's going to be almost revolutionary, I believe. So should we really think about how to control or how to steer the future? I think that's also quite important. For example, I really feel like museum is a very different place from now on. Talking about enhanced experience or reality, virtual reality. Museum right now, though we use reality, the term, but it seems like the reality the museum can provide is quite different from the reality once you step outside of the museum. So this distinction, I don't know. I mean, museum is great. It's going to tell us a lot more. But I think we just talked about that. The website experience and museum experience are very different. So when you walk into the museum, now the museum, I think the purpose of museum, the way people appreciate museum is very different today and in the past. Our study is the same. Now we need to talk about the nature of digital objects. Right. For a long time, we are learning objects just they are the very, very physical or material quality. But now we disseminate the digital objects all the time. So, and to some extent, the digitality will kind of equalize everything. This doesn't matter what kind of material size we can manipulate so easily. how do we, there's an advantage to that, but what do you think about the possible kind of a pitfall of this? So I think that there's a lot of things for Woody, for us to one is, of course, it's very exciting, but at the same time, how we will be able to step back and think about when we say digital this and digital that, so what exactly this digitality means to our field, for the museum. I remember in 2019, there's the Tianlongshan project, based on our Tianlongshan models. In China, there's a huge exhibition, and just right before the pandemic started. And I went over there before it was open because I need to come back to teach. And then so the curator took me over to the gallery, the site. It's huge. The entire museum is all different kind of devices. But when I walk in, I feel like it's completely dead because there's no objects. And then he said, hold on. And he started turning on all the lights and stuff. And then everything's running. There's a virtuality there. There's kind of big screen showing something there. But the entire museum, if I unplug everything, the museum is nothing in there, right? So I don't know, is that a future museum or what? So I think, for me, it's still very shocking kind of experience. And I still try to come to terms with this new reality. So, and I think, hopefully this will be the starting point for us to think about it all together.
Well, museums can be museums with no objects. They can be museums with no walls now. And so it's very interesting to see what we're getting into. And as far as 3D models, and did you print your 3D model of the object? We have many 3D models that are now being printed and exhibited in China with the permission of the museums. And many Chinese have been saying, oh, we must get these objects back. They were taken from us. But actually, the model and the digital information seems more useful to have, to be able to exhibit and to be able to recreate a cave space. You can't glue the original objects, the hundreds of pounds of rock, back onto the cave walls. So we're happy to be able to share these things in new ways.
Thank you. Oh,
Sorry,
want
just
to add more?
to answer your question, we didn't, there's no plan right now to print a copy of the object, although we probably could. I think that's what we're printing is sort of using the company will use the model to size out a custom bottom to ship it in. So it'll get a lot of support while it's in transit. But then again, then there's a model of the sculpture that we could print or we could share with other people. Yes, and that's...
It would travel easily.
Yes, much more easily. So.
Great. I'm sure there's comments, maybe questions also possible. Yes, right there.
Proactive way we can share these objects, digitized objects, with communities of origin, the communities of production, since they are usually indigenous communities, they're the ones without access to all this technology. Thank you.
Yes, we have been trying to do that, working with Chinese teams, and also the caves, they have preservation institutions there. We normally work with them, and through them share this information, and often do things together. Yeah. I think that's definitely is the right direction you're suggesting. Also connecting that to that, also during the conference, I hear this wonderful suggestion and questions, just preservation. We often use this word, but then For whom? For what purpose? I really think we should think really very carefully. But otherwise, we can use the old model, even colonial mentality, to preserve things. Another thing is I find I also learned just the importance of building the content. So it's not just a technique. There are always content. Even database, even archive, there's content involved. Even reconstruction, we talk about the possibilities, there are multiple reconstructions, there always some kind of content, story, subject, subjectivity involved. I feel that part also deserves very careful consideration. Yeah. Other comments and also suggestions about how can we continue this conversation exchange if people have any suggestion for so if this kind of conference would be or workshops would be one form.
We hadn't intended to publish the presentations. We have recorded them, and there is actually interest in publishing what we have presented here
in China, right? In China.
In China.
They
They're
heard
very much
about this
interested.
conference. They said, "Wow, we want to
So
learn the content."
We have been dividing our panels into certain themes, but there are many new themes I think that we've come up with that we can include if we do a publication.
Yeah, that is
That could
suggestion
be
is
very
from
interesting.
Peking University,
Yes.
right? So one of the best university in the country, they want to join this conversation, so to speak. I feel just like the digital forum maybe can perform a role in connecting people because that seems a legitimate place, right? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for having myself and Belgam here. It's profoundly inspiring and humbling to be amongst such amazing folks. One idea potentially to get people together is an online virtual space for those that are interested. There's a lot of options with partners that we're working with at Nowhere, where you can do video conferencing inside a 3D space. It's kind of an interesting spot that has worked out for a lot of other people. So, you know, just having an open space so everybody can grab a drink of their choice at home, hop on the webcam and float around a different part of the world inside a skybox or a custom 3D model that's been created. So just something, you know, maybe kind of like method acting, you know, you're kind of in the thing that you're talking about. So just a thought.
That sounds wonderful. Good, good.
So Deborah raised three very provocative questions, and I wanted to piggyback on one of them, which is the one about future-proofing, and like how, I'm curious if anyone has seen some good methods in place for trying to ensure that things that we create now will still be relevant 3 years from now.
Anyone want to?
It's a bit of a technical question for this panel. I think I have no experience of ensuring that at all. But I mean, I understand the concern. You know, it's a slight modification to a file format to modify the way the metadata, even if all the content is more or less the same. If you're an end user and you're not able to manipulate that and set it back to however it was, you've lost it. So I understand the problem, but I don't have any of the technical skills that would allow me to sketch a solution. I'm not sure whether this panel does or not, but some of you may do. Good.
Just a couple of thoughts on that. With regard to data, 3D data, any kind of data that pertains to the collection, one of the things that has really helped us at our museum is to come together and pick a particular database solution. Not everyone likes the database that we chose, but 20 years ago we were on 25 different platforms, and our IT department said, the whole thing is going to collapse, and we can't possibly support all of these. And so we did pick a very flexible database that we now use, and we ended up choosing eMuseum, initially developed by KE Software, now owned by Axial. It is a subscription system, so we do have to pay for it. It's not an open source system. But it has allowed us to begin chipping away at making the huge number of materials that we have at our museum publicly accessible. It's slow going. If I can refer back to Almira's question about indigenous communities' access, it is slow going and it's expensive. I mean, you don't just database a collection, people have to do the databasing, and that requires double checking all your reading your old handwritten label copy, transcribing it, double checking it, data cleaning, et cetera, you can imagine all the steps. However, we continue to make progress, and having a whole of museum shared system allows us to think in a much more organized fashion about all the backups we need to make, the backups that we make every day, the backups that we store off-site, the backups that we store in the cloud, so that hopefully we can maintain this data in a way that we can keep pushing forward as technology inevitably changes. And then a thought about the technology that we use in the galleries when you're in the museum for an in-gallery experience. It has been so interesting over the years to watch what ages really well and what doesn't. And the only conclusion that I can make is you have no idea and you're just going to have to watch. So to give a tangible example, we now have our Hall of Paleontology, which we call Evolving Planet. We renovated about 10 to 15 years ago. And prior to that time, we had done a very ambitious, too clever by half renovation that was beyond our visitors. It involved all kinds of interesting wordplay on risk and randomness, the random event, and it just didn't hit. And all of the interactives that we had built for it, but for one or two, were early examples of a button to push or a lever to pull. They were about the interactive and not about the thing that we were trying to introduce to the visitor. The one interactive that I can think of that made it through that exhibition and got incorporated into the current version is the tar bucket. There is low-tech as you can get. There is a bucket of tar with, and you pull up a rod, and it's in the La Brea Tar Pit Pleistocene area of the exhibition. And we're talking about why only certain animals are caught in the La Brea tar pits and not all of the animals that were living in the area at that time. Why are there so many saber-toothed cats in the La Brea tar pits? And when you pull up the levers, you're pulling up the equivalent of a hooved mammal, which doesn't have a very large surface area on its foot, versus a big heavy cat with a big furry foot. And it takes a whole lot more work to pull up the big hairy cat foot than the ungulate foot. And so you can begin to see why only certain taxa are well represented in the La Brea tar pits. It will be the same with the technologies that we use going forward. Some of them will date very fast, and some of them will be charming and wonderful, and we'll keep them. And I don't know how we're going to figure that out now. I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
One more question? Yes, Abhi?
Talking about sustaining this format, I definitely agree that on the virtual space, we could hold it as it has become the norm. But I would say that this experience of being in person, it just really cannot be replaced. But I do know that it is a lot of work by Catherine and Akari for just planning this and the curation of different speakers. But being in the same room with all of you, that is very precious. And also, I think as contemporary curator, I mean, both Ying and I, we come from different institutions, but we're in contemporary curating. We don't get a lot of opportunity to actually sit down with archaeologists and hear, like a scholar talk like this. So it's a lesson for us too, like a learning opportunity. So I would say, if it's possible, we should talk offline on how to continue to hold space. Maybe not necessarily once a year, but maybe once another year, and maybe can be hosted by different institutions. I mean, we in San Francisco, we would love to host something like this in the future, because we also do have a astounding collection, and I think this mutual curiosity from both sides is most stimulating. So it's not necessarily a question, but a comment, and I'm willing to do some of the work myself to help us there, to think about San Francisco as a hosting place.
Especially when you have exhibition using new technology, so everybody can go and see and talk about it.
Yes, it might be possible to do collaborative exhibitions.
Yes. I feel we can use all of this, online, offline, and travel. But anyway, so now it's 5 minutes past 4:45. I think I should end this exciting event, but before that, I want to thank the members of our center. Carol, Craig really spent a lot of time and thought to facilitate the organize this event. I want to thank all the participants traveling from afar, from very far, to here and join this, really contribute to this event and the community, new community, and all people who attend this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank the host. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
I really want to thank you.